Good morning, afternoon, or evening for everyone. To everyone, I understand we have some registrants on today from Europe. So, good evening to you folks. Welcome to today's webinar. We're talking about revealing the state of network configuration management and automation in the enterprise. So, quick intro: my name is Glenn Gray, and I'm the director of product marketing here at Itential. And I'm really excited to jump into today's discussion and share some of the really interesting findings that we uncovered from a recent research project that we did in partnership with Enterprise Management Associates. And it's all about the state of network configuration and automation in enterprises today. Really exciting stuff and looking forward to it. But before we get started, let's discuss a couple of housekeeping points. So, everyone on the call will be muted. And if you have any questions along the way, please just drop them in the questions panel, which you can find under the webinar. And I'll do my best to answer questions along the way and cover any remaining ones at the end during our Q&A session. Now, if I don't get to all of the questions on this webinar, I will try to answer them via email shortly after the webinar. So let's get started. So just a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. First, we're gonna talk about the research methodology. I'll get into that in just a second. But after that, we will talk about the state of network automation and currently, what's being automated on networks today, how it's being automated, and how that current style and method for automation is affecting the people who responded to this survey. Next, we'll be talking about the roadblocks and challenges that respondents to the survey identified, and specifically around network automation and configuration management on networks. And some of the high-level topics here will be rate of change, the introduction of cloud networking, and how this has complicated things on the network. And then we'll talk about the top challenges that they identified when it comes to deploying or implementing a new automation solution. And then lastly, what we'll do is we'll take all of that information that we covered and distill it down into a quick evaluation guide that the folks on the webinar today can use to evaluate new network automation solutions. So let's talk about research methodology really quickly. So high level here, we did a survey in October of last year to a database of network practitioners and executives. And as you can see, the split was about 85 to 15%, 85% practitioners, 15% executives. And they have some purview over certain areas of the network. We had over 1,000 responses. 75% came from North America, about 25% came from Europe. We won't talk a lot today, or really at all today, about the split between the answers between North America and Europe. And interestingly, what we found is there really wasn't a lot of difference. I think the types of problems that network practitioners and executives are experiencing in North America are quite similar, if not exact, to the type of problems that their counterparts in Europe are experiencing. We filtered our respondents to make sure that we got the perfect crowd and the perfect respondent pool here. So we filtered by role and not title. And this is a really important distinction to make here, because what we've discovered over the years and what we verified with this survey is that title doesn't really matter a whole lot. Now, I think it matters a lot within a certain organization, but from one organization or one company or organization to the next, a title may be vastly different. And just to give you an example, we had folks that responded to this survey that got past our filtering who told us that they were software developers. And yet when we drill down and ask them what they do on a day-to-day basis, these folks spent the vast majority of their time doing some sort of networking, whether it's in the public cloud or the networking or so on. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure that the people that responded to this survey had some purview over networking tasks in at least one networking environment: data center, LAN, WAN, or public cloud. And so, again, what we've done is we've distilled this down to networking professionals. They may have a title that leads you to something different, but they are networking professionals on their day-to-day basis. We also filtered organizational size here. We were specifically looking at mid to large organizations. So employee count of north of 1,000 and annual revenue north of 150 million. In addition to this, we didn't filter in these types of questions, but we also asked a lot of questions around network complexity. How many devices are on your network? Do you have deployments in multiple networking environments like the data center and public cloud and such? And if you do have deployments in the public cloud or in the data center, how many virtual devices do you have, or how many public cloud networking elements do you have, like VPCs and VNets and so on? So we really try to get a very deep and nuanced understanding of each of the people that responded and the challenges that they're coming up against. All right, so let's talk about the first part here, and this is the current state of network automation in the enterprise today. So the first question, or the first set of questions we asked, were really around what types of network automation tasks or use cases are you automating today? So what you're looking at right now is a set of responses to a lot of different common networking use cases here. So you can see over here on the left hand side, we're talking about things like IP address management, DNS management, things that are really configuration and network configuration management focused, like compliance auditing, device backups, and software updates, right? So these are really common network tasks that most network pros are doing pretty regularly. And as you can see, roughly 30% across the board here of respondents are saying that they have significantly automated these tasks. So that's a lot of automation. There is a lot of automation that's happening on networks right now. There is obviously a whole lot that hasn't been automated, as you can tell here. But again, what we're really uncovered here is that about 30% of respondents are telling us that they have some significant automation going on in each one of these specific areas, like security policy or IPAM and so on. So there's a lot of automation happening on the network right now. So how is this network automation happening? Like, what are the tools that are being used? What kinds of tools are being used right now to perform this network automation? And so we asked a series of questions around preferences for automation solutions and automation solutions that they have in place right now. And as you can see here, commercial solutions tend to be preferred. Like, this is the major preference here. But if you look at the rest of the preferences combined, internally developed automation tools and processes, one-off scripts like Python, Nornir, and so on, open source tools like Ansible or Terraform, you can see that this combination actually makes up the majority of the types of tools that are being used right now to automate those tasks that we showed you in the first slide on networks today. So while there's a preference for commercial tools, we see this as the 800-pound gorilla in the room is really a bunch of open source and a combination of open source and one-off and internally developed. And when we drill down on this and we talk to people, both that are customers and prospects of Itential, and also people in this survey, what we find is that really what we're seeing is a real combination of all of these. You may talk to an organization that says, I'm not using one single tool to do automation. I have a commercial tool that I'm automating XYZ tasks on. I have something that I've internally developed that this part of my organization is using for the data center or something like that, for example. We're using Ansible on legacy devices and Terraform on public cloud networking elements, those types of things. So when you really drill down on this and talk to the folks that answered these questions and talk to, as I said, the customers that we talk to on a day-to-day basis, what we generally find is that organizations are using a little bit of all of these things. And from one department inside an organization to the next, you may have an entirely different set of tools that are being used to automate similar tasks. So I wanted to drill down a little bit on what is a commercial tool. Well, Itential is obviously a commercial tool, right? But when we drill down and we ask about the types of commercial tools that are being used, what we found was that by and large, the type of commercial tools that folks are the types of tools that folks are identifying as commercial tools are really network vendor specific tools or the native public cloud tools from providers like AWS, Azure, GCP, and so on, right? So you think about this, for example, if someone has a largely largely has deployed Cisco devices on their network, they might be using some of the native Cisco tools to do automations, right? And that makes a lot of sense. And similarly, you see that on the other side of the house, right? Where I've got a large deployment in AWS, for example, and I'm going to use a lot of the native tools to automate some of the tasks in that specific area. So right now, the bulk of commercial tools in use today are not tools like Itential, but they're really tools that are being provided as as a bundle with some of the networking devices and that come with the public cloud deployments that most people have now. And so this is a really important distinction to make, because when you think about these types of commercial tools, we'll call them commercial tools, um, really they're very limited in scope to either something that's really vendor specific or really task oriented, like what we see with a lot of the automation tools in the public cloud. Like, you can automate this task, but these aren't tools that you would use to orchestrate broad scale network changes that cover different vendors and different networking environments or domains. So, for example, if I need to make a change on the network that requires me to make a change on an F5 firewall, a Cisco device, and also something in the public cloud. I couldn't use one of these tools to do it. I'd have to string together a workflow of these tools by building some sort of script or employing a tool like Itential. So next we asked folks, how satisfied are you with your current tools? And really what we were asking about is current tools and processes for managing configuration management and automating on your network. And as you can see on this first data point here, there's very little satisfaction with the current automation tools and processes that are in place today. 34% are reporting that they're very satisfied with their current tools and processes. Similarly, what we're seeing is that over 75% responded that they were either somewhat or very concerned that current tools and processes that they're using will introduce some sort of errors onto their network. So this was a really striking finding to me. And I think that really what this indicates is that, obviously there's some broad dissatisfaction going on right now with the types of tools and processes that are in place. But I think, when we talk to our customers on a day-to-day basis, one of the things that we tend to hear over and over is, I would like to automate more, but I can't because I'm worried that my current tools and processes for automation will introduce errors onto my network. And so they're taking this really slow and iterative approach to automating on the network, because they're rightly nervous that the processes and tools that they have in place will introduce new errors, open security holes, and generally affect the reliability of the networks that they manage. So if you're largely dissatisfied with the tools you have, and you're largely worried that the tools that you have will introduce some sort of errors onto your network, how confident are you about your ability to enforce network configuration compliance? Now, before we go any further here, let me just level set on what I mean by compliance. Um, by compliance, I'm not talking about regulatory compliance, although I think that certainly could be a component of what we're talking about here. But what we're doing is we're defining network standardization. And the idea here is that every organization has a set of rules or a set of standards that they want to try and enforce on their network. And these tend to fall into the realms of security, reliability, and performance, right? So when we're talking about compliance, what we're talking about is complying with the rules that an organization has set for their network. So when we asked about specific environments, networking environments like the data center, LAN, WAN, and public cloud, these are the answers that we got back. And the question really is, how confident are you in your ability to enforce configuration compliance in each one of these network environments? And as you can see, confidence is generally fairly low here, particularly in the data center and the public cloud. I would say in the data center, it's frighteningly low. Um, but this is a really interesting set of findings, because I think it really highlights that the confidence in an respondent's ability to enforce network configuration compliance is largely related to the fact that they do not have a whole lot of confidence in their tools and processes right now. So again, this was a really interesting finding here, and I think that the next slide will take it a level deeper here for you. So this one was really fascinating to me, because what we did is we went back and we looked at that same question, but we broke it down by network executives, or IT executives versus IT practitioners or network practitioners here, right? So, and then we broke the practitioners down further by net DevOps and net ops, right? So traditional net ops, and then maybe net DevOps are folks that might be more predominant in the public cloud and the data center space. And this was really a striking set of findings to me, Because what you see by and large is the IT execs have a much rosier view of what's going on right now on the network, and really a much rosier view in their ability to enforce configuration compliance. But when you talk to the practitioners, what they tell you is like, look, I'm worried about this. I have a genuine concern about this. So there's this really big disconnect. Oh, and just in case I haven't described this perfectly here, the blue line are network or IT executives. The pink line is net DevOps, and then the green lines are representative of NetOps folks. And so you can see the striking difference here between the blue line, again, IT executives, and the two practitioners that we identified. So, what does this mean? This means that the folks that are on the ground, the practitioners that are in the weeds, that are actually in charge of making sure that configuration compliance happens in each one of these network environments, they're far more concerned about this than the IT executives are. So there's this disconnect between what's happening on the ground and what IT execs are believing about the state of network compliance right now. So this is definitely an interesting finding, and for you execs on the phone, I would encourage you to take this to heart and try to figure out whether or not there is a genuine problem with enforcing configuration compliance on your network. So similarly, we asked a question around your confidence, your level of confidence in passing a compliance audit. And not surprisingly, we saw very similar answers here. So the data center and the public cloud are very, very low, and LAN and the WAN are significantly higher, but still there is a lot of no confidence, if you will, here, and and these respondents' ability or confidence in their ability to pass a compliance audit in these environments. So another really striking finding here, there is some genuine concern out there in each one of the major network environments around the ability to pass compliance audits. So again, let's look at this broken down by IT executives versus practitioners. And again, you get the same sort of results here. IT execs tend to be far more optimistic about their ability to pass compliance audits in each one of these network environments than the practitioners are. And again, I think that this is a really important distinction to make here, because IT executives, although they tend to have a really good grasp on what's happening in the network at a really high level, they may be overestimating their ability to pass compliance audits and enforce configuration compliance in each one of these networking environments, and that could be a real problem down the road. Okay, so let's talk about roadblocks and challenges that we identified here. So the first set of questions we asked in this area were around the frequency of change happening in the enterprise, right? So how often, basically, are you making minor or major changes to the network? And this was a really interesting one, particularly these two top lines here, more than once a day or 1 to 7 times a week. As you can see, the rate of change on the network is really quite high, and it's really not surprising given the complexity of networks and the strategic importance of networks in today's modern enterprise. And so, most network professionals we speak with, they're indicating that the rate of change on the network is high. And you can see that reflected here. But when we talk to them, they say it's not just high, it's also accelerating. So this is going to be a really interesting question to ask next year and the following year and so on and so forth, because I would expect this to change over time to indicate that more people or more organizations are making more and more frequent changes to the network on a day-to-day basis. So the rate of change on the network is high and it is accelerating. Okay, so why? Well, I think it's because of public cloud primarily, right? I mean, there is the adoption of public cloud, the expansion of data centers, the expansion of hybrid cloud is really accelerating the rate of change requests happening on the network. And so we asked a series of questions around public cloud consumption. And so the question here is, do you currently or are you planning to use any sort of public cloud infrastructure, right? And as you can see, currently respondents 55 plus percent of respondents are saying they're using more than two or more public cloud providers. 28, almost 30% are reporting that they're using a single public cloud, at least one public cloud provider. And then you can see that 12% are saying, I'm not using it, but I'm getting ready to. And then about 4% are saying, I'm scared of the public cloud, I'm not going in this direction. And so I think the big takeaway here is that an awful lot of people are using the public cloud, the use of the public cloud is accelerating. We all know this. This is not a surprise, but I think what a lot of folks, is particularly in executive positions, perhaps don't realize is that the acceleration or the acceleration and adoption of public cloud usage is also accelerating the rate of change on the network. And as the network expands away from the LAN and the WAN and the data center into the public cloud, it introduces a lot more complexity, and it introduces a set of new challenges that a lot of organizations are not prepared for, or really hadn't even considered would be a challenge. So speaking of challenges, when we ask a question around a set of questions around the types of challenges that organizations bump into or come up against when they're trying to implement new network automation solutions, this is what we found. Number one, by and large, was the skills gap among personnel. Now, this is a really interesting one to me because what we find when we dig deep and talk to folks both that are customers of ours and respondents to the survey here is that what they're really talking about is coding. I have a network engineer, and this network engineer has been working in this space for 15 or 20 years. This person has no interest in being a coder, and yet, in order to perform network automation, we or they believe, perhaps rightly or non-rightly, that they're going to have to learn how to do some coding, right? So this is the major skills gap that I'm talking about, because a lot of the network automation that's happening right now, whether it's happening through open source tools, whether it's one-off scripting, whether it is with some sort of commercial product or something that's internally developed, requires some coding to stitch together activities and tasks. And and a lot of folks are identifying this as a big problem. And just to put a finer point on that, we sourced a quote from one of the folks in the survey, and they said we lack trained employees who actually have hands-on experience automating complex tasks on our network. And what they're talking about is the ability to actually code, that skills gap that they have right now. They're really good at their job, but they're not network automation engineers necessarily. The second thing that came up was the effort required to evaluate solutions. And I think that this one really ties nicely to the first one, the skills gap. If you think it's going to be hard to automate on a day-to-day basis, even after you started to learn the product that you're using to automate, imagine that you're coming at this for the first time and evaluating network automation solutions. If you have that skills gap, if you don't know how to code, then the effort required to evaluate a solutions can be really, really heavy and really, really onerous. And so we find that this is a big problem across the board. And this is true when we've had conversations with customers as well. The third one, and I think that this is a really interesting one as well, is the idea of legacy equipment being an impediment to being able to automate complex tasks on a network. And I think the underlying notion here is that because legacy equipment is not API enabled, it becomes very difficult to do automation on it, right? Without some sort of scripting or without an open source tool like Ansible or something like that. So legacy equipment was identified largely as an impediment to doing network automation. And what we find is that folks that are steeped in knowledge in the public cloud, they've been automating for years now. They understand. I mean, they tend to have an automate first mentality, whereas the folks that are in charge of legacy devices, they see the fact that the legacy devices are difficult to automate on, as an impediment to automating. And so they don't really have this automation first sort of mindset, because they don't think that it's something that is specifically doable easily anyway. So legacy equipment, certainly a big problem. Um, Time to value after implementation. Now, this is probably not something that is specific to network automation tools. I would say that this is something that is broadly true of any sort of IT management software that you're planning to purchase. You want to see that you're getting your value out of it as quickly as possible, and and that can be, depending on how much the tool costs and how long it takes you to get it implemented, and how long it takes you to start automating use cases and all of that. It could be a very long time before you start realizing some ROI on your investment. Um, and then lastly, this one is a really interesting one. This is basically saying that there is no automation strategy currently inside my organization. or that there is a poor automation strategy currently inside my organization. And I think this really kind of goes back to that first set of slides that we showed, where you have pockets of automation happening across the network in different areas of the network, by different teams on the network using their own tools, right? There is no strategy for it necessarily. This is a really tactical approach to automation that's happening right now, which can introduce not just some complexity onto the network, but also introduce some fear of automation, right? So, for example, if I'm working on a team and I'm not a network automation engineer, but I'm a really good network engineer, and someone on an adjacent team has developed some script that can do automation on the network, I'm going to be reluctant to run that thing without really fully understanding exactly what it does. And that gets back to that whole skills gap thing as well. So the idea that there is no really kind of like high level automation strategy in the organization was really pervasive, and really came up often as a common challenge here. All right. So this again is the preferences for automation solution, but I wanted to highlight this next to a quote. So as I mentioned at the very beginning of all of this, we did this research in tandem, in a partnership with EMA, right? So Enterprise Management Associates. And Seamus McGillicuddy, who's the vice president of research and network management over there, an analyst, what he told us was, and this is verbatim. He said, many enterprises I speak with say that they built a homegrown solution from Ansible and scripts 5 years ago because vendors didn't have a solution that could do what they needed. Now they think they're too heavily invested in their solution to adopt a commercial solution. So I think this is a really interesting quote. And this isn't something we've just heard from Seamus. This is something that we've heard from prospects. This is something that we've heard from other analysts in the industry as well. Organizations have significant investments, in homegrown automations and open source automations. They've spent a lot of time and effort developing one-off automation tasks, and they're reluctant to jump into a commercial solution because they think that they're going to have to start over from scratch, right? Like I've got to throw away everything that I've done, and I have to re-automate my network from the ground up. And so, as you can imagine, that's a real fear, and it's one that we try to acknowledge in the way that we've developed our product. All right, so we've talked about the challenges. We've talked about the fear that some of the tools that are introducing, in terms of like bringing new problems onto the network. We've talked about all of that stuff. So now let's talk about, knowing all of that, what are the key points that you need to think about when you're evaluating new network automation solutions with all of that other information in mind. So let's just go point by point here and talk about these. So the first one is this concern about the state of configuration on the network preventing automation, right? So this is the talking point I had earlier around, I want to do some more automation. I feel like I need to do more automation because I'm being, I'm under intense pressure to move faster, but I'm really worried about the state of configuration. I'm worried about the state of my existing tools, and I don't want to make matters worse by automating before I go and clean up my house. So that's the challenge. The solution feature, when you're seeking out a solution, is you need something that has network automation and configuration management in a single platform. And often what we see is that these are really two separate things. You see NCCM tools, or what they used to call NCCM tools, were network configuration and compliance tools and change management tools. And then you have automation tools that do automation, but they're not really brought together in a single platform. And the problem with this is that, it still allows people to automate without respect to configuration compliance. And so when you're seeking out a solution, if this is a concern of yours, seek out a solution that has automation and configuration management in a single platform. And what that'll allow you to do is automate network tasks with confidence and compliance. And you know that you can automate because you've built the guardrails that you need in the same platform. Next. So the challenge here is concern about enforcement and configuration standardization. Really similar to the last point, right? I'm concerned that if I don't have standardization of my configuration, I'm concerned that automating will make things worse. So you need an automation solution that has configuration standardization with golden configuration trees, right? Something that allows you to create these golden configuration trees, which serve as the foundational components um, to your broader compliance strategy, right? And I won't get into each one of these in a lot of detail right here. I would encourage you, if you want to know more, if you're unfamiliar with the idea of what a golden configuration tree is, want to learn more about it, spend some time on our website. We've got a lot of information about golden configuration trees out there, and configuration standardization. So the benefits of having something like this are that it ensures that your network strictly adhere to the configuration standards that you set for it, your organization set for your network, and avoid the config drift that could lead to security or reliability issues. All right, this is a really big one that we hear very, very often, and it gets back to the idea of legacy devices, right? Legacy devices being an impediment here. And the challenge is network complexity. So, an organization has a network that has both legacy CLI devices on it that are not API enabled, and then a bunch of API enabled modern controllers like for SD-WAN or something like that. And then a lot of public cloud networking elements like VLANs and VNets and transit gateways and things like that. And so the solution that the feature that you're looking for in a solution here is configuration and automation that is vendor and technology agnostic. Remember we talked earlier about the idea of commercial tools being largely associated with specific vendors, a Cisco automation tool or a Juniper automation tool or an Amazon AWS automation tool. So what you're really looking for here is a configuration and automation tool that is vendor agnostic and technology agnostic. Something that doesn't care if it's a CLI device that's not API enabled or if it's a super modern SD-WAN controller. And the benefits of this are that this will allow you to manage configuration and automate across any network device or element, whether it's for physical or virtual. So again, we talked about this a little while ago, this idea that Seamus brought up in that quote, a heavy investment in open source and one-off scripts, right? So these organizations have spent a lot of time and effort developing some one-off scripts, a lot of automation that's happening in pockets on the network, and they're loath to lose all of that. They spent time and effort on it, and they don't want to throw that away. So the feature you're looking for in a solution here is one that can consume, publish, and reuse existing automations. Don't throw your stuff away. Bring it into your new automation solution, build compliance guardrails around it, and then publish them for broader usage. Okay, unable to keep up with the rate of change on the network. This is a really big one, and it gets back to the idea of complexity on the network increasing. And as we showed earlier, there is a lot of change happening on the network right now, and it's accelerating. And so this presents itself as an impediment. So what you're really looking for here is a solution that has integrations. It has the ability to integrate with any API enabled IT system. What we find here, when you're talking about a network request that comes through, there's a change that has to happen on the network to make that network request happen. But really, the bulk of the time that you're going to spend working a network change request is really in all of the change management process that comes along with it. So in this case, let's say that you've built a Python script that allows you to turn up a port on a switch or something like that. Some sort of basic network task focused network automation. Um, in this case, really, it's all of the other stuff, all the ancillary tasks that come along with that are really time consuming. So I'm going to have to do a pre-check to make sure that I'm not breaking anything. I'm going to have to gather information from systems like IPAM systems and CMDBs. I'm going to then implement the change, but then I have to go back and I have to do a post check to make sure I didn't break anything. I have to update the ticket in ServiceNow. I have to send out notifications to the people who on Slack or on Teams or something like that to who requested it and who might be impacted by the change. Um, I have to go back to my IPAM system and make sure that it's updated. I have to go back to my CMDB and make sure that it's updated. And then I have to go and I have to close the ticket out and document it. So these are the really time consuming tasks when it's, on a network change request, not the actual change on the network itself. It's all of this other stuff that has to happen to manage your change management process. And so what you're looking for here again, is a solution that can integrate with all of these other types of systems, your IPAM systems, your ServiceNows and your Zendesks, your CMDBs, Slack and Teams, so that you can automate all of those ancillary tasks that soak up the vast majority of time when it comes to working a request. So we talked about this one earlier. This is a really big one, skills gap, right? The skills gap on my team is preventing my personnel from coding automation solutions. So what you're looking for here is you're looking for a solution that is low code and drag and drop, right? You don't want to have to spend a lot of time teaching your staff how to do something um, that's going to pay off down the road, right? In other words, this is also part of the time to value thing. The easier the product is to use for anybody and everybody, the faster you're going to get an ROI on this product. And so this allows you to create complex automation workflows without ever needing to write a single line of code. So this is really an important thing that you need to look for in an automation solution. And then lastly, automation solutions are difficult to evaluate and implement. We talked about this earlier, and this was something that was identified over and over again as a top 5 challenge for organizations when it comes to implementing network automation solutions. So you want to find a solution that has a free product trial, and I think that this is a pretty straightforward thing. You want something that you can go out and get your hands on and try yourself and see if it works for you, and see if you can understand how to use it and get value out of it as quickly as possible. And then you want something that has some pre-built automations. And what is a pre-built automation? Well, we talked about some of those common use cases at the very beginning of our discussion. And if you're seeking out a solution, you want to find a solution that has automations that allow you to hit the ground running. They're already built, and they're already sort of structured for you to do a little bit of work to them, to customize them, so that they'll work on your network without having to build these automations from the ground up. This is a great way to learn how to use the product, and it's a great way to learn how to, or a great way to get value out of the product really, really quickly. So the benefits, obviously, learn to use the product, see how it solves your use cases, and then begin automating complex issues as quickly as possible. All right. Well, it wouldn't be an Itential webinar if I didn't talk a little bit about our product. Um, so automate on any network. These are the real big benefits here. Automate on any network, from legacy devices that are 20-year-old hardware devices, to API-enabled controllers, to VPCs and VNets. You want to be able to automate anything. Itential Automation Platform allows you to do that. Configuration standardization, as I mentioned earlier, this idea of combining configuration and automation in a single platform, that allows you to enforce configuration standardization with automated guardrails to keep your network secure and reliable. Um, the skills gap, anyone should be able to automate, and with Itential's automation platform, they can. It's a low code drag and drop canvas that eliminates the need for you to have to retrain your staff. And then lastly, accelerate your time to value. I talked about this a second ago with the idea of getting started fast by integrating with a bunch of networks and IT systems, and then using pre-built automations to realize value as quickly as possible. So these are really big features of Itential Automation Platform, and they will really help you realize time to value quickly. And so we have a quote here from the VP of Network Architecture, Engineering, and Operations to S&P Global. It was a big customer of ours, Guru. Almost immediately after working with Itential, we started to realize the true value of delivering services the same day without having to go through a reskilling process, right? So this is a big customer telling us, like, look, this was a problem. The skills gap was a problem for us. They chose Itential because their environment is truly hybrid, um, automating across any network, and their platform works best in both worlds. So there you go. We've got a couple of questions that have popped up here. I'm going to answer those. Before we do that, I want to just make sure that you see this piece of it. Feel free to go out and try Itential for yourself. If you're an executive and you want to have someone on your team try it out and see if it works on your network, this is a great way to do it. This is a cloud native, fully managed offering. You can connect it to devices on your network, but to really learn the product and really learn it as quickly as possible, what I would suggest is using it it's in the mode where it uses the mock devices that we've created for it. And so it's a fully built out mock network environment, that you can automate against, and learn how to use the product without deploying it in your own environment. So definitely encourage you to try that out if you're interested in automating quickly. Itential.com/get-started. So let's take a couple of questions here. So first question, we are doing a lot of automation with Ansible. Why would we switch to a tool like Itential? So as you can imagine, this is a question that we that we get quite a lot when we're talking to customers. So I would say some things to think about here are, Ansible is a really fantastic tool and it's really great at automating specific tasks. And so we see that's why it's so largely and widely deployed in so many organizations. Now, having said that, I will say that it's not particularly good at the orchestration of network changes, like we talked a little bit about ago. Um, when you're building out automation workflows for network changes, we believe that it is important to include these compliance guardrails that we talked about. So with Itential, you can build things like the golden configuration trees that allow you to build pre-change validation. You can automate the validation of a change, of a pre-check before it actually happens. You can automate the remediation, and you can build these sorts of foundational building blocks directly into your automation workflows. And if you have an Ansible script that makes the network change, you can pull that into Itential's automation platform, and you can build these compliance guardrails around it and publish it so that anybody can use it and anybody can sort of self automate on the network, knowing that it's not going to break anything, introduce any security risks or reliability problems. So, and then again, as we talked about earlier, the idea of fulfilling network change requests, it includes a lot more work than just making the network configuration change. It's all of the other stuff that we talked about, the change management procedures, the pre-check, the post-check, the documentation of the change, um, notifications, updates to ancillary systems like IPAMs and CMDBs. And these are really the time-consuming tasks when it comes to working through a network change. Itential automation platform allows you to orchestrate and automate all of those tasks. So, if you're spending 10% of your time making the network change and 90% of your time making all of these change management processes happen, that's really where you can focus on reducing the amount of time spent on tasks that are not as value add as making the change itself. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, I think the idea of reusing your investments in Ansible, bring your Ansible playbooks and modules and stuff like that, and import them into automation gateway, um, build the automation guardrails around them, compliance guardrails around them, and build them into workflows with Automation Studio inside of Potential Automation Platform. Okay, one more question here. Okay, so you talked about the lack of automation strategy being a common challenge for an organization. How does your software help a company with no automation strategy? Well, in short, it can't. I mean, I can't create. We're not in the business of creating automation strategies, but we can give you a basic blueprint. Um, and in fact, I would encourage you to check out the Network Field Day event that we just participated in. You can find this on our website. I'm going to drop this in the chat window in just a second, see if I can dig it up while I'm trying to answer the question here. But um, the thing that we demonstrated at Network Field Day was really sort of a strategy or a blueprint, if you will, for kind of getting started with Essential Automation Platform, really basically, and then taking it all the way to where you're self-service networking or you're doing event-driven closed loop automations as well. But the general idea here is that you bring in your existing automations. If you're an organization that has significant investments in things like Ansible and things like Python scripts and stuff like that, bring those in. We're going to onboard those into the Essentials automation platform and through Automation Gateway. You want to connect all your devices and federate your inventory. Oh, and I just found this, so I'm going to try and load this up here too. I'll put this in the chat window. I would recommend that you check this out. But at any rate, what you want to do is you want to onboard your devices, federate your inventory. You want to start by automating configuration management tasks, right? So the idea here is that you're always automating. You're not necessarily cleaning up your house before you automate. You're automating the cleaning of your house, if you will, which allows you to build compliance guardrails so that you can run these bigger automations. So you bring in your existing automations, you connect to your devices, you start by automating configuration management tasks and building these compliance guardrails, golden configuration trees, um, automated compliance reporting, validation, automated remediation, things like that. You integrate with your IT system so that you can start doing end-to-end networking, like I talked about. So you want to integrate with your ServiceNow, you want to integrate with Slack, you want to integrate with InfoBlocks, whatever tools you're using that are part of that change management process, and then you can start automating those tasks that are associated with change management. And then once you've done that, you've got automations that you can publish as self-service so that someone can go in and run these automations on their own, um, or you can set them up to be event driven, right? So for example, you could have a log and event management system like a Kafka or something like that kick off one of these based on some sort of event. So someone makes a change on the network that runs afoul of one of your compliance rules. Potential automation platform is notified via some sort of event driven system, and that kicks off an automation to remediate the problem. That's just an example, but that's one of the things you could do with it. So again, we're not in the business of developing an automation strategy necessarily, but we can give you sort of a blueprint for how you can do this and how you can be successful with it. So look in the chat window, check out the NFD videos. I think that'll give you a really deep level understanding of how you can do this. So that's really all we've got time for today. I really appreciate the questions and feedback that we had, and enjoyed talking about this research with you. And hope to see you at our next webinar, which will be coming along shortly. So thanks again, and take care.